bienvenida a Aris Komporozos, primera vez en Argentina, ¿verdad? First time in Argentina. So bienvenido a Argentina, Aris. Ana Kazumi, la directora de NYU Buenos Aires, está de viaje, así que me toca hacer de anfitrión con Vero, somos anfitrionas. Y fundamentalmente, antes que nada, queríamos agradecer a NYU Buenos Aires por todo el apoyo para organizar este evento. Y también a CONICET, ¿no? Especialmente la figura de Mario Peceni, que sponsorearon el evento junto al IDAES, ¿no? Así que son todas instituciones que van colaborando para hacer posible actividades como esta. Muy brevemente queríamos contarles con Vero que esta forma parte de las primeras actividades que estamos organizando en el marco del laboratorio colaborativo o colaboratorio que se llama Territorios Críticos, en el que vamos a impulsar conversaciones críticas en torno a preguntas en torno al territorio. Justamente pensando que quizás la gran disputa o una de las grandes disputas de este momento es la pregunta por el territorio, allí donde pareciera que lo que tenemos en común es la tierra. Antes que la nación, antes que la identidad, antes que la cultura, lo que tenemos en común es la tierra. Y justamente eso que tenemos en común es lo que está bajo asedio brutal en las nuevas formas de acumulación del capital. Entonces la idea del laboratorio es trabajar herramientas críticas que vengan desde los feminismos y desde las luchas antiextractivistas y ambientales, como para desarrollar herramientas que nos resultan relevantes y aptas para los desafíos del presente. La idea del laboratorio nos da un formato muy flexible, donde podemos hacer eventos como este, podemos hacer grupos de estudio, ojalá, cruzamos los dedos, podamos tener proyectos de investigación de short term, ¿no? Ojalá podamos tener residencias de artistas, vamos paso a paso, pero la idea es esa, así que van a estar recibiendo información sobre las actividades y los planes del laboratorio, que queremos que se vuelva justamente, ¿no? un lugar de cruce de vocabularios y de invención de prácticas.
Bueno, bienvenido Aris, muchas gracias por combinar un viaje a Chile con esta visita a Buenos Aires. Yo quería contar la historia, que es que este libro de Aris, Tan poco marcado, yo lo empecé a leer porque Gabriel me lo recomendó y todavía no está en español, pero probablemente dentro de algún tiempo lo vamos a poder traducir y publicar en español. Y hay una palabra que es clave y que seguramente hoy Aris hablará de ello, que es la de especulación, ¿no? Y para quienes venimos discutiendo temas de deuda, de financiarización de la vida cotidiana, pero también temas de imaginación y de las formas en las cuales el endeudamiento, la deuda, intenta capturar tanto el futuro como la imaginación. Bueno, esta investigación de Aris es fundamental. Con Gabriel recordábamos el título de una querida profesora y amiga, Josefina Ludmer, que hablaba de América Latina como un territorio de especulación, que es una manera de pensar que la teoría en América Latina está siempre vinculada a una especulación de la imaginación política. Y esa es otra de las líneas que nos interesa también muchísimo para el Colab, y que es también pensar la especulación como un territorio, que es contra la idea de que la especulación es lo puramente abstracto, lo que no tiene ni cuerpo ni tierra. Justamente lo que venimos trabajando también con lecturas feministas de la deuda es cuáles son los cuerpos y los territorios de esa pretendida abstracción que no hace más que extraer valor y capturar cuerpos y territorios y aparentemente deshacerse, ¿no?, en el aire de los valores de los mercados especulativos. Entonces nos interesa muchísimo territorializar esa noción de especulación, abrirla a la disputa de cuáles son los imaginarios de la especulación Y Argentina para eso es una especie de laboratorio extremo, por no decir vanguardia, de la especulación. Tenemos economía bimonetaria, tenemos una historia enorme sobre la especulación misma, tenemos un gobierno fascista que no hace más que pensar en cómo vender el país y convertir el país en esto que llaman zona de sacrificio, ¿no? Que esa es otra de las cuestiones para nosotros fundamentales cuando estamos pensando los territorios críticos. ¿Qué significa que la zona de sacrificio, que es un término de los proyectos neoextractivistas, se convierte en una especie de proyecto de país, que es básicamente lo que está haciendo Milei, ¿no? Por estas cuestiones, la otra noción que Aris pone al término especulación es el de comunidades. Él habla de comunidades especulativas. Y ese es otro término que nos parece muy fértil para pensar, para de alguna manera amarrar a la idea de especulación, pensar en términos de lo común, lo comunitario, y qué significa construir una dinámica que le pone cuerpo, territorio a esa comunidad y que no regala la posibilidad de especular, ¿no? Queremos quedarnos con esa posibilidad de especular, así que para nosotras es un placer enorme. Muchas gracias por venir y adelante.
Last but not least, Aris Komporozos es autor de Speculative Communities, es el director del Center for Capitalism Study en Social Research Institute de University College London y muchas otras cosas más. Era cuestión de protocolo, teníamos que decirlo. Así que ahora sí, bienvenido, Aris.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, also for the invitation to speak here. And it's a real pleasure to be with you this evening, and excited to be involved in this way in your new project and this experimental project, the laboratory that you're launching. And I look forward to being involved in more ways if I can. And so today I'll speak about some of the themes that Veronica already mentioned that appear in this book, Speculative Communities, that came out now 2 years ago. It was written mostly in the period leading up to the pandemic and in the first year and a half of the pandemic itself. So it carries with it some of the atmosphere and the anxieties and the uncertainties that were heightened at that time. So it's actually a bit of a personal book as well. And what I'll try to do is I will present to you, and I'm not sure whether, should I show the slides? Is it a good point? I can just do the... Yeah, now it shows, okay, perfect. So I thought what I'll do today is I'll give you some context on the themes of the book, how some of the key questions emerge, and then I'll read a bit a vignette from the last part of the book, which is, the book is split into 3 sections. The first section, essentially it attempts to trace the impact and forms of financialization and resistance to financialization across the realms of economy, society, and politics. And I will start with the last domain, the domain of politics, because I think that's perhaps the richest territory for discussion here. And the final thing I want to say before I start is that I'm not going to make references to the situation in Argentina. Veronica just began to talk about it, but I'm hoping that we'll together find some links here between the work and what's happening. So here it is. I mean, I've listed some of the questions that informed the research that went into this book, but at the heart of the book is what I consider a paradox of recent times, which is this. On the one hand, we have an increased radicalization and embedment of uncertainty into all realms of everyday life, spanning from everyday social life, uncertainty in the realm of from the realm of intimate relations to the realm of political forms of instability. And the paradox here is that although that uncertainty exists and becomes exacerbated by finance and financialization, we don't seem as a society to be striving to control it. There is what I thought a paradoxical endorsement, increased endorsement of that uncertainty in our lives, which is something that is reflected, as I say, here from our choices of government to our pursuits of intimacy. We kind of dive into the uncertain. We dwell into the uncertain moment rather than attempting to control it, to put a brake on it. And so my attempt to understand this paradox brought me to a deeper engagement with the world of finance and financial markets, precisely because that is a world that, unlike common wisdom, does not love certainties and stability. It flourishes in the territory of the uncertain and the volatile. This is where high finance finds its greatest opportunities for profit. So there's something about the way in which finance cultivates and benefits from uncertainty, and the way in which increasingly our social and political life seems to be endorsing an attempt to gain something from uncertainty, that I found fascinating to link and study that link between those two realms. And so I'll start with this short vignette that takes us back to 2020. And these are the months preceding the then presidential election in the United States. A lot of the book takes examples from the US and the UK and France and Greece. So but the US is very prominent in the book. And we're ironically yet we find ourselves in the moment of an American election as I'm reading this. So it will be interesting to see how the echoes of this story to today. But here it goes. In June 2020, amid the first wave of the coronavirus pandemic and during a global wave of Black Lives Matter protests, a string of unusual stories made headlines. On June 5th, news media reported that BLM supporters had launched a coordinated cyber attack sabotage against the social media accounts of the Dallas Police Department. The department had asked its followers to post video evidence of illegal activity during the weekend's demonstrations to their I Watch Dallas app, which you can see here. The amateur TikTok saboteurs responded by posting a relentless barrage of fan cams, that is parlance for video and photo compilations of K-pop idol or group images, you can see here, but also including gaming clips, anime GIFs, a rather chaotic content inspired by K-pop that overloaded the app and forced the police department, to announce that it will remove that app due to technical difficulties. On the same day, Newsweek magazine ran a story about a separate wave of K-pop fan cam attacks on social media accounts that were associated with the far-right conspiracy network QAnon. And in the days that followed, similar attacks on conservative and neo-fascist hashtags, such as All Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, and so on. All of those attacks deploying the very same method, an onslaught of randomly selected, willfully disorienting, off-message images and videos of K-pop bands. The aim of these attacks was to subvert Trump supporters and white supremacists and their efforts to disseminate information and organize meetings through the use of hashtags in real life, in physical meetings. And that was a successful outcome, because what happened here is, through the confusion that was thrown out into these message boards, the messages and the attempt to disseminate real information amongst Trump supporters was drowned out. A few days later, on June the 10th, President Trump announced his decision to host a rally for his 2020 re-election campaign in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's a story that I'm guessing will be familiar with. That would have been his first major campaign since the pandemic's outbreak. And in a matter of days, a call for sabotaging the event went viral on Instagram and TikTok. Hundreds of teenagers swiftly reserved tickets for the event with the express aim of never showing up. So on June the 20th, the day of the event, when the president took the stage, the arena looked spectacularly empty, as we can see in this picture here. Much to the surprise of the Trump campaign, the media, and all those watching, it transpired that the majority of tickets had been reserved by TikTok saboteurs. How had that been possible? The Tulsa fiasco is reminiscent of another much debated event involving a controversy around the presence of crowds and the blurred line between reality and fiction, Trump's 2016 inauguration ceremony. How large was the crowd that gathered on the US Capitol West Lawn to watch that speech? Speculation on TV networks, social media was rife. Public debate soon turned to photoshopped crowds and other image tampering, as well as claims of alternative facts. This controversy about the presence or absence of crowds was in fact the first episode of the post-truth saga that marked Trump's time in office. The fake news debates all began in earnest with this very controversy. The Atlantic magazine called this as an attempt to weaponize magic. Similar criticisms were leveled at Tulsa's TikTokers in 2020. The culprits behind those attacks were identified as alternative alt TikToks. That is a TikTok subculture comprising young, mostly teenager users that use the popular video sharing app and is characterized by a strong community identity. Alt TikToks are known for even higher levels in the irreverence and obscurity of their uploaded content than those commonly circulated in the app. Their posts are seen as the true chaotic space of the platform. A popular argument, represented for instance by the then Washington Post's technology correspondent, cautioned against this group's outlandish practices, deriding them and its politics as an activism of online tricksters. But even a president known for denying reality, on this occasion seemed to understand that the offensive against him was a hazy act of speculative politics. But unlike the West Lawn's photoshopped crowds, the emptiness of Tulsa's arena was indisputable, plain for all to see. Much like in the BLM acts that I described earlier, TikTokers here did not use technology as a means of creating a fake reality, but deployed fakery to create real chaos. Like competent political speculators, they cared little about controlling the direction of their actions' outcomes. Rather, they inserted themselves into the tidal movements of volatility. Their activism did not aim at revealing their targets' evils, which is a strategy we typically associate favored by whistleblower activists and their tradition. Rather, these saboteurs sought to drown and muddle their opponents' messages. Another interesting aspect of those kind of attacks is that they were not lone wolf hackings representing an outsider's unauthorized invasion into proprietary space, but rather they were actions that worked collectively within such platforms by gently shepherding the algorithms towards their own aims. Considered together, these acts had a cumulative effect of disorientation that wasn't immediately perceived as such. The point I want to make here is that while Generation Z's political memes circulated openly on Instagram and TikTok's proprietary platforms, and they seemed even more obscure than the alt-right subreddit messages of the 2010s. These memes and these political memes, this confusing mix of messages is the result of those agents growing and being trained and nurtured in a technological environment where ambiguity and ambivalence is not an enemy but a natural ally, specifically and especially when they confront uncertainty. Those kind of attacks emanate from the very same spaces and technologies that we use in our everyday pursuits of sociality and even intimacy. And the argument I'm making today is that such acts form part of a wider phenomenon, a different way of living with uncertainty in our financialized world. They represent a dynamic and collective imagination that is expressed through speculation and that defines how we engage, how we embrace, and even encourage or even weaponize volatility. How we stake the unknown, not with the intention of controlling the future, but in the hope of benefiting from its uncertainty. And so speculation, a core concept in the book and in my work and in my understanding of contemporary capitalism, is not merely a metaphor, but rather a logic, the defining logic of our time, a consequence of increasing unpredictability and precarity, but also a structure, as I will try to show next. When we are confronted with an increasingly turbulent world, we give up on rational risks and predictable returns, and instead place wagers on a widening range of incomputable outcomes, not only in how we approach questions of money and the economy, but also in how we engage in politics, in everyday culture, and in our social and romantic lives. And so I want to now go a bit deeper into the notion of speculation and how I approach it in the book. And part of what I try to do in the book is open up the understanding of speculation with reference to the world of financial markets. So there is an interesting duality within the concept of speculation that interests me, and that duality appears in the operation of markets. So, but first a broader comment on this speculation. Whether in markets or in gambling, in philosophy or in religion, speculation tosses a coin of uncertainty with the hope of seeing through an uncertain future. It is a mirror, a speculum, and a watchtower, specula. It animates a certain vision from the leaps of scientific revolutions and technological futurity to the pursuit of dreams and mystical theologies. Searching the world for signs and portents, speculators have always sought to capture what lies ahead. Driven by such visions, they breed prophecies that tie people together into shared fates. Or they place high-risk wagers whose volatile yields exacerbate that existing uncertainty further still. Speculation in that sense, is a point I want to emphasize, stands both for closure and openness to the unknown. So to speculate as an act exposes us to the unknown and embraces, throws us into the varying possibilities and varying different outcomes. But also, by speculating, we make projections of that unknown, and those projections offer some stability. And what is more, speculation is not an individual solitary act. Even in the world of financial markets, speculation assumes an imagined collectivity, an imagined other trader who speculates on whatever financial product, prices, values, and so on. So in the book, I trace the origins of financial speculation in what I call the first wave of intense financialization of American capitalism in the late 19th century. And that is an important point in the timeline that interests me, because I wanted to break with that argument that sees financialization as and its birth in the post-1970s era of neoliberalism, the marketization, the waves of the retreat of the welfare state in global economies leading up to the financial crisis of 2008. Yes, that is an important period of financialization, but there is a rich history of speculative finance taking on a form that becomes highly influential for society and politics, and in ways that are rather fascinating. And I trace back to the story of the Chicago Board of Trade. I'm going to skip a little bit of the historical context because I want to ultimately focus back to the present, but it's worth mentioning the Chicago Board of Trade, which is it's founded in the mid-19th century. It takes off as the first institutionalized, formalized market for future products in the world. That is the highest risk type of financial instrument. These are contracts that are essentially, it's a secondary market. They are contracts that are take on unwanted risk from the real economy. In the case of Chicago, that was the farmers of hog and wheat in the hinterlands who were faced with radical weather uncertainty. And so the Chicago Board of Trade is allegedly, at least, here we have an attempt to create a class, a financial asset class that aims to protect farmers from that uncertainty of future outcome by essentially generating that contract. What happens in the years and decades that follow the establishment of this futures market is that the trading of future contracts of those financial instruments vastly overtakes in volume and in value, in financial value, the trading of real material assets in Chicago's economy and indeed in American and global economy. So we have represented here for the first time so starkly the removal of finance, the levels of remove from material reality. So how financial speculation becomes a highly profitable and inventive game in which gains, importantly, institutionalized legitimacy. And so the story of the legitimacy of future trading as a highly speculative activity is one that interests me, because it's and I look at this closely in the book because it's a story of legitimizing highly speculative financialized American capitalism as we came to know it in the century that follows. And so here we have an alliance of courts, so the Illinois court, the representatives and legal representatives of financial traders defend. So there are cases that go to these courts against speculative activities as claiming that it is merely gambling. So there is an attempt to separate conceptually gambling from speculation. That is a key battleground for that intellectual territory, and an attempt to offer legitimacy to the one, speculation, that happens in Chicago's Board of Trade, and gambling, which takes place where, this is a nice Brecht quote that tried to capture what was going on, and he couldn't understand what was going on, where value is generated, what happens with that kind of speculation is so removed from reality. But the attempt to separate that kind of speculation in CBOT was by juxtaposing to the gambling that takes place in bucket shops. Bucket shops where this gambling dens, usually underground, unlike unlike in the Chicago Board of Trade, these are places that disorganized speculation takes place. These are places where farmers, people of color, migrant urban workers, women, groups that were excluded from futures markets, have the opportunity to place bets by following the stock ticker. So by following a real-time representation of what's happening inside the palatial halls of speculation of Chicago. But these imagined netherworld of dingy gambling houses serves as a scapegoat to those celestial halls of futures trading. By transposing the evils of speculation to outcast lay bettors such as those, the pits and the denizens of the pits and their institutional allies strengthen the legitimacy of the American Homo economicus. They cast it as a noble figure whose speculative endeavors have a social benefit society at large. So the idea here is that speculators in CBOT, by taking on unwanted risk from parts of society like farmers and others, they perform a social function. They calibrate risk. They offer at the same time liquidity to markets. So they perform a desired function, even though their activities are entirely speculative. Okay, so I wanted to make the distinction about the speculation of the many, which is seen as repugnant, and the speculation of the few, which is seen as not only desirable, but socially beneficial, okay? And that's a key way of, that struggle of legitimacy is then won in the late 19th century in that field of battle. And the significance of that victory I claim in the book we are witnessing and living through to our time. Now, this Bruegel here attempts to, it's a tulip mania painting, and it attempts to capture the madness of speculative fever. In the book, I make an argument about how the worlds of formal speculation and informal speculation both share some of that mix of rationality and rational methods of engaging with uncertainty and irrational or non-rational, extra-rational ways of engaging with the element of uncertainty. So, in the book, I trace the significance of astrology, for instance, both in high finance. So you have Dow and J.P. Morgan, huge figures of American capitalism, making lines to heed the advice of Evangeline Adams, the great astrologist of that time, right? Or you have folks in highly respected financial institutions experimenting with methods of prognostication, financial prognostication, that are highly astrological, or they look at mapping the movements of stock prices to sunspots, to astrological cycles, the birth of technical analysis, which is prominent until this day and is highly questionable in terms of its scientific method of financial prognostication. What I'm saying here is that there is this world, this spectacular world of speculation is both obscure and spectacular, and it's a world of bitter conflict, and a world that I want to emphasize here is far from insulated from broader social reality. The point I'm making here is that speculators then and now are a mirror image of society rather than a deviation from it. They reflect the drive to lay wager on the unknown in the face of radical uncertainty. And so, how am I doing with time? Okay, we're not tracking it, okay, right. So I want to return to the present moment after this detour. So we experience today an environment of highly technologized, turbocharged financialization, both in markets and in our everyday life. In markets, we're dealing with the likes of high-frequency trading, machine learning, big data, algorithmically powered, super-fast trading. Trading whose inner workings are often, and that's an interesting point, indiscernible even to traders themselves. Finance becomes a black box that even traders have struggled today to understand. This kind of trading takes place often in virtual pits with data scientists and coders sat in front of rows of screens monitoring a ceaseless search for patterns through stacks of data, including predictive analysis of social media content, informing trading decisions. Not all that different to the practices of yesteryear's financial astrologists. Another aspect of today's finance, but also, as I will argue, of today's political field, is gamification. So, the world of financial trading has become quite shockingly impossible to detach from the world of games. Not only in the sense that the atmosphere, the ethos, the attitudes around the riskier parts of financial trading resemble participating in a game, but in the literal sense of financial traders being trained through games, through play, and recruited in financial firms through playing games, and whereby games continue to take place in parallel with the trading. I mean, this is Sam Bankman-Fried, who I include here because he's a kind of interesting representative of contemporary, the world of contemporary crypto finance, whose political significance is something we're dealing with at the moment. This current American election is called the first crypto election, right? Krugman called it that. More than 20% of Americans are currently invested in cryptocurrencies. Sam Bankman-Fried here, holding this stack of cards, this famously conducted every single meeting or interview alongside trading in real time and playing the League of Nations. Is it not League of Nations? It's called the League of... I can't remember the title now. It's hidden behind there. But so he was... The playing of games is embedded, inseparable to the financial activity. A very interesting book describing that world came out last year by Gary Stevenson, a London-based financial broker who makes really beautiful, unpacks how financial trading has become entirely a game. And now this is a game. This is a game that we have seen in events such as the GameStop scandal, which is a bit old now, but it still captures something quite interesting, is we see instances increasingly of this dreamlike world of hyper-technologized finance and its thirst for volatility. We encounter such instances in social instances of immersion in a gamified reality of financialized digital media, where speculation becomes a mass spectacle, breaks out of the organized pits or of these rows of screens or of the rooms where SBF was dwelling, to become really a game for the many. And so we have retail trading of highly volatile assets that is exploding in the post-2008 era. Cryptocurrency, and when I was writing the book, cryptocurrency had not exploded in the way it has even more recently. Meme and penny stock trading. These are the spaces that provide, in effect, the online bucket shops of our own time's virtual punters. interestingly, events like the GameStop saga, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but it was this grassroots short squeeze on the price of the iconic video game retailer GameStop, organized via social media and making headlines in 2021. These instances betray a world where volatility is now treated as an opportunity and where ordinary people come together to sow rather than avert uncertainty in the hope of profit. An aspect that links to the political question here is that what I want to close the talk with, that the point that speculators like the GameStop short sellers follow a long trail of traders for whom the worlds of wizardry and reason were never too far apart. These everyday speculators care little about disentangling reality from fiction in their everyday digital lives and encounters. They are drawn to stranger narratives, increasingly untethered from material reality and weaved into the mainstream. Here I'm talking, perhaps most alarmingly, about the confusion that is sown by the rise of right-wing conspiracy fantasies and regressive movements like QAnon, which are moving rapidly from the fringes of political discourse to center stage. So under such conditions, speculation should be seen as an apt and imaginative response to a chaotic volatility that is wrought by financialized life. Importantly, and that's another key point, it is a collective rather than a merely individual act. The kind of speculation involved in these gamified worlds evokes a yearning for community that is often neglected in critical analysis, and an imagined connectivity. In other words, a joint hedging of uncertainty. Wagers across economy and politics, from the crypto bros coordinating short selling to benefit from destabilized prices, to voters in Middle England sowing Brexit chaos in the hope of disrupting the liberal technocratic status quo. These are bets that are oriented towards new types of solidarities and often confusing political alliances. This is something that historian Quinn Slobodian has described as diagonalism. So political alliances that cross traditional party boundaries, and they're often make strange allies and bedfellows that are hard to identify and with our current political vocabulary. Such speculations place demands on the future in ways that encompass, rather than seek to control, elements of doubt, ambivalence, and cynicism. This is a volatile type of amorphous politics where moods and vibes dominate. Finance animates the strange forms of those politics, of the libertarian far right, neo-populisms, this post-truth marketplace of ideas that emerges in that space. And markets have always operated by searching for liquidity in the ebbs and flows of collective moods. But now our politics seems to subscribe to the same fractious temporality and volatility in this realm of anti- or hyper-politics, if we can call it that. These are political spaces that, forms of politics that grow in the social spaces of what I call speculative communities. These are spaces where a new vernacular emerges that is structured around technologized infrastructures provided outside necessarily of markets themselves, but infrastructures that are highly financialized. And the example of such structures, one of the examples of such structures that I give in the book that are not from within the world of finance, but from our own everyday life, is the example of digital astrology and its explosive popularity amongst younger generations. So what is interesting about the astrology, and why do I even consider it as part of a speculative or counter-speculative politics? The example I take in the book is that of CoStar, which I'm told is still a popular app, developed by an alliance of software engineers, amateur astrologers, and literary consultants. It's an app that mixes the language of algorithmically generated poetic sarcasm with a distinctive monochrome visual aesthetic. It offers daily messages to the users of irreverent darkness, instructing them to do things like start a cult, get off the internet, check their ego, and so on. This unusual function of astrology apps has been hailed as the new psychotherapy for Gen Z, or as psychotherapy plus magic. The opacity of the algorithmic predictions, I mean, it doesn't really offer predictions. That's the point I want to make. It offers a sort of esoteric iconography and some cynical and playful messagery that is loaded on our screens. And what I see in this is an apt representation of chaotic everyday life experiences. These kind of predictions, quote unquote, bear out rather than intervene in our experiences and in the user's expectations of their future. So while the attraction of traditional astrology in more wholesome times seemingly lay in the comfort of its determination and prediction, its digital successors make no promises of certainty. Yet their Neptunian fog, their uncertainty, resonates with a moment's zeitgeist. As CoStar motto goes, astrology is fake but true. And now we need irrationality to invade our techno-rationalist ways of living. But rather than merely stoking this ennui, astrology app now harnesses representations to connect people, much in the manner of the TikTok platforms or Instagram that I opened this talk with. CoStar's personal charts are intrinsically social, linked in real time to the charts of users' extended networks and friends. And they are, for that reason, entirely speculative. This speculative kind of sociality is one of the app's most popular features. It allows users to discover how compatible they are with each other in terms of, among other categories, emotions, as represented by Moon, intellect, by Mercury, sexual desire, by Mars, idealism, by Jupiter, and so on. An important note here on the role of speculative technologies, then, that I want to make through this example is that the striking popularity of these technologies, to which I also include dating apps, a whole nother discussion here that I'm not going to analyze, represents a shift in the function of algorithmically powered social media. From instruments of mere datification and co-optation into a surveillance system led by prediction, the imperative to predict, to vehicles of collective uncertainty and to incubators of a speculative sociality that defines our time. These are technologies that mediate, in other words, the ways we imagine and experience contemporary finance capitalism. And so here I take some distance from critics that, although rightly point out this element of co-optation into a system of surveillance capitalism that is undeniable. There's an element of truth in that. I'm interested here in also how these technologies do something more than co-opting our lived experiences into commodified predictive data. I'm interested in how they can also produce and represent the conditions of uncertainty that define a new mode of social being, what I call in the book the homo speculans. And so to understand the homo speculans, and I will leave this will be my conclusion, the role of the imagination. The role of the imagination is something that the book, this is the intellectual origin of the book. It lies in my falling in love with the Greek-French philosopher Cornelius Castoriadis, who is the foremost theorist of the imagination, to reading closely, again, an extremely popular work by Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities, and trying to bring those works into understanding the new financial subjectivity that emerges from the 19th century and in more prevalent ways today. And so This homo speculans is a member, has a sociality that the venerated or crucified homo economicus doesn't contain. So here, I distance myself from critics, for example, such as Wendy Brown, who makes the point that finance and financialization signifies a fragmentation or entails a fragmentation of the political, so that it is merely seen as a destructive force of the demos, the undoing the demos. Now, I'm not saying that this is false, but I think it's an insufficient way to understand the political impact of finance and, in contemporary life. And so, with speculative communities and the role of the imagination, I seek to rehabilitate, if you like, a more imaginative subjectivity and a more imaginative economic agent that is implicated in new forms of politics that are the result of financialization, perhaps an inadvertent outcome of financialization. So I'm interested in those new political spaces that emerge as an outcome of financialization. And so focusing on the imagination gives me a new entry point, and perhaps working towards a new language that I think is a necessary, needed project in our time with which to understand these new political forms and this new political subjectivity. And what more to say of all this? I'm trying to decide what to leave you with here, perhaps as a final note. I do want to make that very powerful point that Benedict Anderson makes around the generation of collective imaginaries and how they link for him in his work to the rise of nationalism, to state nationalism as we know it. And this is a familiar story perhaps to folks. And the beauty of Anderson's argument is that he sees capitalism as linking to nationalism, not through modes of production and it's not the Marxist analysis, but through print capitalism and the infrastructures of print capitalism, the narrative novel, the newspaper, how these become the technologies of circulating new kinds of imaginaries, collective imaginings, collective modes of belonging to an imagined entity, the nation, right? And so for Anderson, it's the turn of the page of the newspaper every morning that enacts the idea of the nation, the imagined idea of the nation. And so the point I make in the book is that if publishing novels and reading newspapers are the tools by which Anderson proto-national imaginaries materialize, then posting stories and TikToks and fan cam K-pop content online, scrolling through streams of social media, and so on, is how our speculative communities come to life. Our everyday use of speculative technologies is capitalism's new vernacular. Proprietary algorithms, image and video sharing platforms, social media, location-aware dating apps are the commodified tools of connectivity that animate such speculative communities. And importantly, the members of those communities are neither lone narcissistic gamblers nor passive dupes of a surveillance capitalism. Our immersion in the transient worlds of TikTok, Tinder, co-stars, and so on becomes, as I hope to have demonstrated in this talk, a way of coping collectively with the unknown. So, to really close, speculation is not merely a symptom, as mainstream critics of economic and political theory often suggest, but a structure of today's financialized capitalism, something more foundational and generative, and therefore it may also contain valuable answers to the financialization of modern life. And this is a proposition that has implication for our ways of rethinking the political use of speculation as a weapon that can be mobilized not only against neoliberal democracy, like in the case of nativist conspiracists and right-wing populists, but against finance itself, as an instrument for orienting a radical collective imagination towards more inclusive myths and future narratives that help those in the margins of capitalist society to resist the logic of capital. As such, speculation speculation, I call for speculation to also be understood as a field of action that may also enable movements that challenge the paradigm from which they emerge, by driving us towards figuring out who we are and who we can be in the face of radical uncertainty. Okay, I'll finish here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. I believe we're going through a renaissance of imagination and speculation right now. And there's speculation in society at large, but also like in the humanities, speculative realism, philosophy, for instance, and so on. And one of the aspects of speculation is, like you said, unpredictability, uncertainty, and an openness to the future. But on the other hand, I think one of the main tasks of progressive thinking today is to imagine and project futures, possible alternative futures. And projection implies the desire of some certainty in the future. So how do you reconcile the task of speculation as openness to many possibilities with the task of progressive thinking nowadays, I think, which is to imagine project possible futures different from capitalist reality?
Do you want me to take them individually?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this question. A very important one. And so I didn't have the chance to sort of delve into this question of openness versus closure, which is captured by the idea of speculation. But what I would say with regards to the need for alternatives, so I mean, you're talking about the need of imagining concrete alternatives to the hurricane, the political and otherwise, that we're experiencing in different ways, in different contexts, right? So what I'm hearing is, what you say is that openness, speculative openness, is not able in and of itself to bring about that concrete alternative, to concretize specific modes of political programs or alternatives. And so this is how I see the two sides of speculation being equally important. So on the one hand, it is absolutely necessary in an environment where the political right is completely winning in that game of sowing chaos, uncertainty, volatility, and disrupting modes of established modes of political communication and you know, the toolkit that liberal democracies have had in their disposal to conduct politics. This is an arena that is profoundly disrupted, especially in the aftermath of 2008 and the rise of, you know, the Trumpist populism, its global variations from, you know, India to Brazil, and you know, it's now such a prevalent political culture in which there's no offer of concrete programs. The programmatic effectiveness of that politics is very poor. In other words, voters are not drawn to Trump because of the certainty and the clarity of the political program he offers, right? And my point is that I don't think they're solely drawn to Trump because of his kind of extreme right, nativist, nationalist, regressive agenda that can be seen as, okay, that is maybe clear. There is something about the chaos that he represents that seems like the last resort of hope for some people, right? They relate to that. And so I think for progressive responses to that political moment and that political culture, we ought to think of ways that how to navigate that space and retaining openness and not, or to put it differently, not being imprisoned in the need for articulating clear and succinct and alternatives in and of themselves as an imperative is an important, I think, is an important part of that politics. So we need, I think, a progressive response to that speculative, a counter-speculative response, if you like, the way I see it, although I don't have myself the answer of what it can look exactly, but it is a politics that retains openness while also striving for modes of closure, let's say security, insurance, that are not regressive, that are forms of solidarity, of collectivizing responsibility in the face of uncertainty, that take different, more progressive directions. Yeah.
Yo voy a ser muy egoísta. I'm going to make you practice your Spanish. Y como ya tengo el micrófono en la mano, since I already have the mic in my hand, quiero hacer una pregunta que me parece absolutamente fascinante la conversación, y gracias, Aris. Realmente me parece que abrís ahí un campo de interrogaciones que además mezcla tantos vocabularios, ¿no? O sea que realmente es una intervención formidable. Estaba pensando muchas cosas, pero entre ellas un poco en relación a la pregunta de recién, un poco la cuestión cómo funciona la pregunta por la especulación que te estás haciendo en relación a mapas cada vez más claramente divididos en torno a centros coloniales y centros colonizados. Digo, la cuestión del colonialismo en la especulación, porque evidentemente el experimento, y de paso para empezar, para pasar a Argentina también, el experimento argentino en curso tiene todos los elementos que vos describiste, pero varios más, ¿no? La velocidad de la implementación de políticas, ¿no?, directamente dirigidas al extractivismo, y la especulación que se juega en torno a la apropiación de territorios. Eso por un lado lo pensaba. No te digo cómo lo estás pensando, qué te parece, cómo puedes jugar esa variable de lo colonial. Y una parte de esa pregunta, sobre todo pensando en la última parte de la presentación con Benedict Anderson, porque claro, Benedict Anderson tenía the vernacular, tenía la lengua nacional, digamos, como el factor que estaba aglutinándose y formándose en print culture, ¿no?, la cultura impresa. Acá tenemos otro escenario, ¿no? Porque si es TikTok, es K-pop, es una heterogeneidad. Digo, ¿cómo funciona ahí lo que se concentra en el norte global y lo que se desparrama en un sur que cada vez más explícitamente, como en el caso de Argentina, nos volvemos proveedores de litio para las baterías de los teléfonos celulares donde se produce la interconectividad? No es una pregunta, es nada, una invitación como a reflexionar, y no tenemos respuestas para esto, pero sí quizás avanzar un poquito en esa dirección. Nada, eso. Ahora sí.
Well, no, thank you for these points. And I mean, there's a lot to think about there. I'm afraid I might not have, on the spot clear answers. The point, I mean, this is something that I have thought about a little bit after writing the book, in the sense of the sort of the relevance of the argument around these more heterogeneous forms of technologies and the narratives to which they result, and I trace them in very specific contexts. It is the American context, both the political and the technological, and sort of and its kind of periphery in Europe. I mean, these are the examples that I have engaged, and I make an assumption that there is something in that heterogeneity that has a universality in the form of politics that we use. I mentioned Bolsonaro and Modi in the book, and there is, of course, Putin in Russia, who is a very interesting case in terms of this politics of chaos and how one can politically benefit from it. I'm not. There is a point in what you make there, which, if I understand correctly, is that there is also the dimension of so looking at the global context, relations of power, and the colonial history, the ways in which it affects this historical process of financialization that I'm describing, the kind of speculative modes of politics that it gives rise to, and that the ones I have in mind in the book are the populist party in 19th century United States, which seem to be very prone to speculating. And if you look at India at the same time, there is fascinating rise in other kinds of speculation around bazaars and the financial centers of colonial India. It's not. I mean, I think it would be a fantastic point of further research to look more closely at, what, because I think I know what where you going with this maybe, and it is, if we want to link, for example, with what's happening to Argentina today, rampant financialization has given rise to this monster, right? And how is one to interpret my argument around a counter speculation in this political moment in Argentina? It's an interesting discussion. I mean, I think maybe I'll stop here, but I'm interested in hearing from you also what you make of this in terms of relevance. And but yeah, it's not. One needs to be cautious about universalizing there.
Questions, comments? What you just mentioned about you mentioned the diagonality, I think, of the type of. I think this is something that is emerging here, right? This is something that we're starting to see, a kind of crisscrossing of a political map completely redone. These weeks in Argentina are very demanding, but I think that is a crucial dimension in what you say, that the political maps are being radically redrawn, and probably the politics of connectivity that you point out. I think that will be key to understanding immediate future processes. So that's something that maybe we will go back to that point. Más preguntas, sí.
So I think there's something what you're saying, and thanks for a brilliant presentation. I was late, but I think I got the gist of it. For me, at least, it's very inspiring, because I feel that here we are constantly thinking about what's going on to us, clinging to really maybe perish forms of existence and resistance. And resistance is a key word for us, and we kind of try to always keep alive what is dying. And there's kind of an invitation in what he's saying to really, okay, yes, maybe a lot of the things that we used to experience are dead, and we have to think from this new landscape that is emerging, that is terrifying, as you describe it, but also seems to offer opportunity, right? And this is what I heard in what you presented, the possibility of a new political imagination. And I think that this is something that, I mean, we are, as an Argentine, we are great, I would say, militants and activists, but sometimes we have a problem in finding new ways of response to the things that are happening to us socially, politically. And we seem to be on the defense a lot. And now we are experiencing something that is a total, I mean, we are not going to go into the details, but it's really clearly they are destroying us in a lot of senses. And that force is part of what he was describing economically as well. So maybe it's time to kind of try to, embrace this speculative. And I was also thinking, while you were, I don't know if you do this in your research, but all the time while I was hearing you, I was thinking in how science fiction can be a tool in this type of, creating a new imagination. And in Latin America and in Argentina specifically, we have a lot of new science fiction being written that can offer, I think, new maps, new tools, right? Especially after the last 2 weeks, I really feel we need to start from scratch and really imagine something radically new, because what we have is we are not being able to resist precisely anymore. So thank you again. It was very inspiring in that sense of maybe trying to see this, of course, as a total defeat, but also as an opportunity maybe to think new forms of politics and political organization and political images, language, rhetoric. Yes. And maybe, I mean, since I have the mic, as you're saying, I was also, I mean, the part on astrology was kind of, a little sarcastic, and I get it, of course. But there's something there that I think is interesting because, especially resonates with us. Astrology has become this pop simplification and almost like very shallow take on it, but it has with it this, centuries of knowledge. This is the ancestral, by definition, in the West, and on the limits between the West and the East, right? So I think that's another. I was mentioning science fiction, but then again in Latin America, there's a lot of examples of how science fiction coupled with ancestral knowledges, local ancestral knowledges, can lead to new forms of new political languages. So astrology, of course, can have this form, but could also be, and I'm not limiting it to astrology, I mean, ancestral knowledge is as something that can offer some kind of inspiration as well. Okay.
Thank you for this. I mean, this is, you put actually more eloquently than I did, in my first response, this point around the need to rethink, and not just rethink, but I think the point here is look more closely at corners of political life that we don't tend to give enough significance and attention to, in order to understand different ways of political collectivity and political agency that might be relevant precisely in this desperate moment in offering a response to what folks are experiencing. And so, you talk about astrology, and I don't think it's such a far-fetched, I mean, I use it for a reason, because, so CoStar, I'm not suggesting CoStar users are the new kind of revolutionaries of our time, but there is something about, I mean, there are works that are fascinating on, for instance, like decolonial astrology, or queer astrology, or, ways of using these mystical forms of mystical knowledge and foreknowledge as spaces that open up relations and kind of do some collective solidarity work. They're not the main political vehicle I'm suggesting here, but there are interesting examples of how, and especially new generations of political agents find themselves attractive as modes of inhabiting together. The other point I want to say is that this is not far-fetched for another reason, because the political right, as seen is the explosion of conspiracy theories and the political currency of conspiracy theories. I mean, what is at the heart, what lies at the heart of the political appeal and success of QAnon? I don't agree. I mean, the debate, the terms of the debate around delusional crowds and irrationality that leads one to believe lies, it's a very shallow explanation of the phenomenon. For me, what these worlds are also rich. They're highly. We can find a lot of epithets to use how unsavory they are, but they are rich in myth. They're rich in ways of imagining that are weird, bizarre, irrational. But it is something about the texture. There is something about the texture of the myth that performs a connective function, right? People are searching for truth in, the pizza parlors and Clinton and all of that. They're in the search together, in the game together, So my point is, this is already a prominent feature of the success of the political right. So what are ways of imagining of political resistance that are not afraid to encompass the mythical and the imaginative in strange forms as well. So that's where I'm trying to position the relevance of speculation.
Bueno, un comentario más que una pregunta. Por un lado, escuchando lo que decían, no es casualidad que una de las personas más perseguidas ahora en Argentina por las bandas de trolls de la presidencia de la Nación es una astróloga feminista muy popular en Argentina, que además de hacer predicciones y sobre todo encuentros colectivos, tiene un mensaje político permanentemente, ¿no? Y es una de las principales atacadas por el gobierno. Y siempre parece como desmedido, ¿no? Porque el gobierno, la Oficina Presidencial de Comunicación, estaría dedicado a una chica de barrio que se hizo astróloga y que es muy popular, ¿no? Justamente ahí me parece que hay algo de la dimensión de lo especulativo cuando es colectivo que claramente tiene un poder que es muy claro. El otro punto, que en Argentina hay una discusión muy fuerte sobre la llamada adicción a las apuestas de los jóvenes que están en las escuelas, ¿no? Y entonces la única respuesta que hay es prohibir internet en las escuelas para que no se pueda apostar. Entonces ahí también me parece que hay una dimensión de que muchos jóvenes contra las ofertas de trabajo hiperprecarios, mal pagos, ven en la especulación una forma, digamos, con la que ya tienen un entrenamiento justamente por la cuestión de los juegos, ¿no? Pero eso está, de nuevo, fuertemente criminalizado porque son dinámicas juveniles, colectivas y muchas de sectores populares. Entonces, este corte, digamos, cuando lo especulativo incluye una discusión sobre el trabajo, incluye una discusión sobre el saber, se hace de modo colectivo, directamente tiene un mensaje político, ¿no? Y muchas veces creo que desde los discursos políticos esas imágenes no son pensadas en términos de modos actuales de la política, ¿no? Sino que más bien son como o fenómenos culturales o fenómenos marginales, pero que no estarían confrontando realmente con la cuestión, digamos, de las ultraderechas, para decirlo así. Y por último, decir que en Argentina hay una manera en que se ha vuelto obligatoria la especulación debido a la inflación. Es decir, hoy la manera de enfrentar la devaluación de los ingresos es ejercitar permanentemente pequeñas especulaciones, con billeteras virtuales, con distintas apuestas, con distintas formas de navegar en la especulación, digamos, de baja intensidad, porque son siempre especulaciones menores. Pero es algo de ese entrenamiento en la especulación lo que hace posible resistir la velocidad y la violencia de la inflación. Entonces, también ahí hay una subjetividad política que es un modo de enfrentar algo de la devaluación permanente de los ingresos, con mucha ambigüedad y con mucha ambivalencia, ¿no? Porque también es un gran negocio para las billeteras virtuales, por ejemplo. Pero me parece que ahí hay escenas políticas, sobre todo con la cuestión de la hiperinflación, los sectores juveniles empobrecidos y precarizados, y un lenguaje que le habla a las juventudes, como puede ser la del horóscopo politizado, que me parece que son elementos como muy interesantes para interlocutar con esa diferencia que marcabas cuando lo especulativo es colectivo, sin capital, digámoslo así, versus lo especulativo concentrado y con capital.
Fantastic. These are such rich thoughts. I don't have much to add to what you just said, other than they are very illuminating in how. Oh yes. Yeah. I was just saying, I mean, these are such rich thoughts, and just, for me, very illuminating examples of this distinction between individual gambling and collective speculation, whilst also what you said is an example of the challenge, or the, let's say, the inability often of political class and often progressive forces to understand that distinction, right? For me, the interesting question then is, because I've been thinking about the question of money in Argentina, because I was, faced with it in a very material way, right? In ways that, I'm not in my everyday life. So there is something about, I was fascinated by what you said, this speculative subjectivity that around inflation, and how when Argentinians have to kind of cultivate that, and it's part of their everyday life. There's two quick thoughts I had on this. One is, I'm really fascinated by the materiality, the material contact with money, that is missing in most capitalist economies, right? In Argentina, that speculative mode towards inflation, it also involves a very material contact with money, and with trading and exchanging. So with the social aspect of it as well. So I wonder whether the link, because part of what I'm trying to understand and to explore is precisely that link, from the mode of subjectivity to a mode of collectivity. And so, yeah, I wonder is how you see this potential, this possibility, in the context you're describing, in this. I mean, just the final point. I know maybe these are a bit scattered, but in the book I talk about Greece in 2015, the period of the referendum that was to reject or endorse the terms of the Troika, the European Central Bank, the World, the international, the IMF, an organization that Argentina is very familiar with, terms of austerity, in effect, with a threat of defaulting, of debt default, exit from the Eurozone, and so on. So there was a referendum, we all know it. I did a bit of an ethnographic work there, and I was experiencing the days leading to that referendum with this dilemma around rejecting austerity and falling into chaos, or endorsing it as 90% of the mainstream political forces and media forces were urging folks to do, for some stability, for an idea of stability, whatever that might mean in terms of the neoliberalization of the existing, economy pushed to its limits. So what happened there is, that surprised everyone, was an overwhelming victory of that collective no. And an interesting aspect of it was that banks shut down. There were credit controls that were imposed the week of the referendum by the Troika as a mode of strengthening, of pushing folks towards one direction, right? And but that was a move that led to people taken to the streets. It led to people queuing. So physical interactions around ATMs, and these are situations that are familiar in other contexts as well. But there was something about that week and its politics around the kind of socialization that was happening around those credit-controlled, imposed banks, and the attempt to take cash out of those banks, that led and was linked ultimately to an expression of a very uncertain political, a very highly risky or risk-endorsing political decision. There is something there I'm not articulating very clearly, but you made me think of that observation, and so I wonder, what are ways of articulating this kind of sociality around money in Argentina, rather than merely either dismissing it or linking it to, the ills of financialization that undoubtedly is linked to. But what else does it allow us to understand about economic agents and as political agents?
I talk in English or in Spanish? En Spanish. No, quería, Aris, muchísimas gracias. Realmente me resultó muy inspirador este foco en la necesidad de la imaginación y las imaginaciones. Y me preguntaba también si consideras en tu análisis importante el factor de la ansiedad, ¿no es cierto? Porque creo que también del lado de todos estos procesos que estuviste comentando, hay una industria psicofármaca, de psicofármacos creciente, ¿no es cierto? Y que creo que tiene también una incidencia importante, como esta relación entre, bueno, de qué manera poder producir nuevas imaginaciones y un sistema que desarrolla subjetividades cada vez más ansiosas y que se anestesian a través de tecnologías que crean una bola de nieve en estos procesos de ansiedad. No sé, como un comentario.
Thank you for this question. Very, very important. And the question of anxiety, because anxiety is undoubtedly linked to the forms of uncertainty brought about by financialization. Interestingly, it's also an area that I have done a little bit of work with a colleague of mine, Max Haven, who's a brilliant scholar of the political imagination. And we looked at the so-called anxiety epidemic in university campuses, especially in North America and in Europe, where we're both based. What is often framed as an anxiety epidemic, a mental health crisis in university institutions. So basically students and staff, but students in this occasion become increasingly anxious, faced with high levels of anxiety in the face of a destabilized university sector, a future without guaranteed employment, repayment of debt, all of those factors. And what we saw, and we ran some workshops with our students as well, and we put these questions to them, and we tried to explore the forms of what is the politics of anxiety. That's what interests us. Because alongside this narrative of an anxiety epidemic in universities, there are also then the responses to it. There is medicalization, or there is the wokeism debate that these young students, they just had it so easy and cushy, and so too much complaining, but not so, that we need to, in fact, this is something that needs to be ignored. It's not to be acknowledged as a problem. But what underpins often discussions around student anxiety is the an assessment of apolitical, that there is of passivity, that there is a passivity, that the anxious student is also a withdrawn and isolated student, not participating in student unions, not being involved in forms of political action, or and that's something that we sought to sort of counter with the workshops and the work we did. And a long story short is that what we saw is that forms of expressing and collectivizing anxiety that speak to some of the examples of spaces and technologies and political spaces that I look at the book. So students coalescing around message boards and using technologies in ways that were quite political, but not leading necessarily to political participation as we would expect it. But also moments of managing anxiety collectively and supporting each other, and intuitive ways of supporting each other. And finally, that's the very interesting point and the link, ways of subverting a university system that aims to cater to the anxiety epidemic by increasing mental health support, by offering more accommodations to students that suffer from anxiety, by extending the assessment deadlines, giving more time for things. We found moments of playful subversion of those structures, which are seen as box-ticking, tokenistic addressing of needs. But there is a politics of anxiety but that doesn't. I'm realizing I've done something slightly different to what you asked me to do. Anxiety is a problem, but I think ground level emergent responses to anxiety, we can see in them some of the speculative politics aspect that I'm trying to capture in this work. So I think there is, so that's the link that I would see between anxiety, uncertainty, and speculation in thinking about this.
Okay, chicos y chicas, ya. I think we have to free Aris. Gracias, Aris. This was a fantastic conversation.